I paid for my son's wedding, then he sent me away. I stayed quiet. The aftermath shocked him. Elaine had learned to live quietly. Not because she wanted to disappear, but because quiet had become her way of surviving. Since the day her husband passed, the world had felt louder and heavier, and she found peace in staying on the edges of things. She woke early before the sun, made her tea the same way every morning, and sat at the small kitchen table where the light came in just right. From that chair, she could see the street, the trees, and the slow movement of life outside. She liked that view. It asked nothing from her. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Her son, Mark, was her whole world. He always had been. From the moment she first held him, small and warm against her chest, her life rearranged itself around his needs. She worked longer hours, skipped meals, wore old coats longer than she should have. When his father was alive, the sacrifices were shared. After he was gone, Elaine carried them alone, never saying much about it. She didn't think of herself as brave. She simply did what needed to be done. Mark grew up fast. He was smart, confident, and full of plans. Elaine watched him move through childhood like someone meant for bigger rooms and brighter lights. She sat in the back rows at school events, clapping softly. She packed lunches with notes she knew he rarely read. She saved every drawing, every award, every small proof that he was becoming someone strong. Even when he left home, her days still followed his rhythm. She waited for calls. She smiled when he visited. She listened more than she spoke. When Mark called one evening and said he had news, Elaine knew before he finished the sentence. She heard it in his voice, a kind of excitement mixed with certainty. He told her he was getting married. He spoke quickly, like the words were racing to escape him. Elaine felt a familiar mix of joy and ache. She congratulated him, her voice steady, even as her hands trembled slightly around the phone. She asked the usual questions. When was the date? Where would it be? How was he feeling? Mark answered, distracted but happy. He talked about plans, about how busy everything was already getting. Elaine listened, nodding though he couldn't see her. When the call ended, she sat in silence for a long time, letting the news settle into her bones. The wedding plans moved fast. Mark mentioned venues that sounded expensive, food that came from places Elaine had never visited, decorations she had only seen in magazines at the doctor's office. Elaine didn't interrupt. She didn't offer opinions unless asked. But one afternoon, as they spoke about costs and worries, she heard hesitation in Mark's voice. Without thinking too much, Elaine made her offer. She told him she could help. Not everything, she said, but some of it. Enough to make things easier. There were no conditions in her words. No expectations hidden between the lines. She didn't ask for recognition or control. She simply wanted him to have the day he dreamed of. Mark was surprised. He thanked her quickly, almost awkwardly, then moved on to discussing details. Elaine didn't mind. She didn't need long gratitude. The relief in his voice was enough. That night, Elaine opened the old box where she kept her savings records. Years of careful planning lay inside. Extra shifts. Small pleasures denied. Money set aside quietly, just in case. She ran her fingers over the papers, feeling the weight of each decision she had made. Then she began to plan how much she could give without putting herself at risk. She was practical, even in generosity. As weeks passed, Elaine's savings slowly disappeared. She paid for the venue first. Then the catering. Then the decorations Mark admired in photos. Each payment felt like letting go of something she had held for a long time. But with every receipt, she imagined her son smiling, standing tall on his wedding day. That image made the emptiness easier to bear. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. Not friends, not neighbors. She didn't post about it or bring it up in conversations. It felt private, almost sacred. She was contributing from the shadows, and that was fine with her. Elaine attended planning meetings when invited, sitting quietly while others spoke. She nodded, smiled, agreed. She offered help when needed, folded napkins, counted chairs, made small calls. Often, people forgot she was there. She didn't take offense. She had grown used to being invisible. Sometimes, she caught her reflection in shop windows or mirrors at the venue. She looked older than she felt. Lines traced her face where laughter and worry had lived. She straightened her posture and reminded herself that age was not a weakness. It was proof of endurance. At home, Elaine adjusted her budget carefully. She cut back on heating, bought cheaper groceries, skipped outings. None of it felt like sacrifice in her mind. It was simply a shift in priorities. She had done this before. Many times. There were moments, late at night, when doubt crept in. She wondered if she was doing too much, giving too freely. She wondered if anyone noticed. But then she remembered Mark as a child, standing proudly with a school project she had helped him finish after midnight. She remembered his smile when he succeeded. That memory quieted her doubts. As the wedding date grew closer, the excitement around Mark increased. Calls became shorter. Messages were often delayed. Elaine understood. She didn't complain. She told herself this was how life moved forward. Parents stepped back. Children stepped into new roles. One afternoon, Elaine visited the venue alone. She had gone to finalize a payment and decided to walk through the space afterward. The room was empty, sunlight spilling across polished floors. She imagined it filled with music, laughter, movement. She imagined Mark at the center, confident and happy. She stood there for a long time, hands clasped, heart full. She felt content. Not proud in a loud way, but calm. This was her contribution. Quiet, steady, complete. When people spoke about the wedding, they talked about how beautiful it would be, how elegant, how impressive. Elaine listened, smiling softly. She didn't correct them. She didn't explain her role. It wasn't necessary. Her reward was already inside her. At night, she sometimes took out an old photo album. Pages showed Mark growing up, moments frozen in time. She traced the edges of the photos, remembering each story. She whispered small wishes for his future. Health, peace, love. As the final weeks approached, Elaine felt a strange mix of closeness and distance. She was involved in every detail, yet standing apart from it all. She told herself this was natural. This was how a mother let go. On the morning she paid the last bill, Elaine sat at a kitchen table again, tea cooling beside her. She looked at the empty envelope where savings once rested. There was a moment of silence, heavy and real. Then she breathed out slowly. She had done what she set out to do. She had given without asking. She had loved without limits. Whatever came next, she believed she had done right by her son. Outside, the day continued as usual. Cars passed. Birds called. Life moved forward. Elaine rose from her chair, washed a cup, and prepared for the next quiet task, unaware that her silence, her generosity, and her unseen role were laying the foundation for something far greater than a wedding day. Elaine noticed the change slowly, the way a room feels colder before you realize a window has been left open. Nothing happened all at once. There was no argument, no sharp words. Just small shifts that added up over time. In the beginning, Mark still called often. He talked about flowers, seating plans, music choices. Elaine listened the same way she always had, patiently and with interest. She offered thoughts when he asked. Sometimes he didn't ask at all, and she accepted that too. But as weeks passed, the calls grew shorter. Sometimes they didn't come at all. Elaine told herself it was normal. Weddings were busy. People got overwhelmed. She reminded herself of her own wedding long ago, how fast everything had moved. She didn't want to be the kind of mother who complained or demanded attention. So she waited. And when Mark did call, she made sure her voice sounded light. The first moment that truly stayed with her happened during a planning meeting. They were sitting around a large table at the venue. Mark, his fiancée, her parents, and a few other relatives filled the room. Elaine sat near the end, hands folded in her lap. They discussed the decorations Elaine had paid for weeks earlier. A family member from the other side praised the choices, smiling widely. They spoke about how thoughtful and generous the idea was. Elaine waited, expecting Mark to mention her name, even briefly. He didn't. He nodded along, agreeing, letting the praise land somewhere else. Elaine felt a small sting, quick and sharp. Not because she wanted applause, but because the silence felt heavy. She reminded herself it didn't matter. What mattered was that everything was coming together. After that, similar moments followed. Decisions she had helped fund were spoken of as joint efforts or credited entirely to others. Her role slowly faded from conversations. When she tried to offer gentle suggestions, they were met with polite smiles and quick changes of subject. Once, she mentioned a seating idea she thought might help guests feel more comfortable. Mark listened, then glanced at his fiancée before replying. He told Elaine they already had it handled. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was final. Elaine nodded and leaned back in her chair. She told herself she had overstepped. She reminded herself again that this wasn't her day. The words started appearing more often. Our vision. Our plans. Our day. They were never spoken with anger, but they carried weight. Each time Elaine heard them, she felt herself step a little further back. She noticed Mark changing too. He was still respectful, still polite, but there was distance now. His eyes didn't linger on her the way they used to. He checked his phone often. When she spoke, he listened, but only halfway. Elaine watched the new family closely, not with jealousy, but with curiosity. They were confident, expressive, comfortable taking up space. They spoke freely, laughed loudly, made decisions quickly. Elaine had always been careful, measured. In their presence, she felt smaller, quieter than ever. She tried to blend in, to not disrupt the flow. She dressed simply, spoke less, smiled more. She helped where she could, folding programs, organizing small details. Sometimes people thanked her. Sometimes they forgot she was there. At home, Elaine replayed conversations in her mind. She wondered if she had said something wrong. She wondered if her silence was being mistaken for indifference. But she couldn't bring herself to speak up. Conflict felt heavier than disappointment. She reminded herself of the promise she had made when she first offered help. No conditions. No expectations. That promise became her shield. One evening, Mark stopped by briefly to pick up some paperwork Elaine had stored for him. He stood near the door, clearly in a hurry. Elaine asked how things were going. He said fine, everything was almost done. She mentioned the final payment she had made earlier that week, not to boast, but because it felt practical to say. Mark paused, then nodded. He thanked her, quickly, distracted, already thinking of the next task. Elaine smiled and told him it was nothing, because that was easier than admitting it felt like something. As the days went on, Elaine found herself excluded from certain discussions entirely. Decisions were made without her knowledge. Plans were finalized before she heard about them. When she did find out, it was often after the fact. Once, she gently asked why she hadn't been included in a meeting. Mark hesitated, then explained they didn't want to overwhelm her. Elaine thanked him for being considerate, even though the explanation left her feeling strangely hollow. She began to understand her new place. She was a supporter, not a participant. A background presence, useful but not central. At night, Elaine lay awake longer than usual. The quiet that once comforted her now felt louder. She wondered if this was the beginning of a permanent distance. She wondered if she was already being replaced in ways she didn't yet have words for. Still, she chose silence. Every time she felt the urge to speak, to remind Mark of her role, she stopped herself. Love, she believed, didn't need recognition. True giving didn't ask to be seen. She thought about her late husband, how he had always admired her strength. He used to tell her that kindness was not weakness. Remembering that helped her hold steady. During another planning session, someone asked Elaine directly what she thought about a detail. Before she could answer, Mark gently stepped in, saying they had already decided. The room moved on without pause. Elaine felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her expression calm. She folded her hands tighter and focused on breathing. Afterward, she excused herself early. Outside, the air was cool. She stood alone for a moment, letting the feeling pass through her instead of fighting it. She told herself this was temporary. Once the wedding was over, things would settle. She returned home and busied herself with small tasks. Laundry, dishes, organizing drawers that didn't need organizing. Keeping her hands moving helped keep her thoughts quiet. Elaine never spoke badly of anyone. Not to friends, not to family. If someone asked how planning was going, she said it was beautiful and exciting. And it was, in its own way. But inside, something had shifted. A line she didn't know existed had been crossed, softly, without announcement. As the wedding day drew closer, Elaine accepted her role fully. She stood back, watched, and waited. She loved her son enough to let him move forward, even if it meant leaving her behind. She told herself again, and again, that silence was not lost. It was a choice. And she chose it, believing that love, when real, would find its way back without needing to be called. The wedding day arrived bright and warm, the kind of day people later described as perfect. Elaine noticed the sky first when she woke up. Clear, wide, and calm. She took it as a good sign. She moved slowly that morning, careful with each step, careful with her thoughts. She wore the dress she had chosen weeks earlier. It was simple and neat, nothing meant to stand out. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, smoothing the fabric, adjusting her hair. She wanted to look respectful, present, appropriate. Not important. Just present. When she arrived at the venue, everything looked just as she had imagined during her quiet visits. Flowers lined the entrance. Music floated softly through the air. Guests arrived smiling, dressed in bright colors, carrying excitement with them. Elaine greeted a few people she recognized, offering gentle smiles. Most were busy, caught up in their own conversations. She took her seat and waited. From where she sat, Elaine could see the careful details. The decorations she had paid for glowed under the lights. The food stations were arranged beautifully. Everything worked together, smooth and polished. She felt a small sense of relief. Whatever else happened today, the event itself was beautiful. As the ceremony began, Elaine focused on Mark. He stood tall, confident, surrounded by people who loved him. Her chest tightened with pride. She remembered him as a little boy, standing nervously at school events, searching the crowd for her face. Now, he didn't look back at all. Elaine told herself that was okay. The ceremony passed without trouble. Vows were exchanged. Applause filled the space. Elaine clapped softly, tears forming but never falling. She wiped her eyes and smiled. During the reception, things became louder, faster. Music played. People moved between tables. Laughter echoed across the room. Elaine stayed near the edge, sipping water, watching. She didn't want to interrupt. She didn't want to be in the way. At one point, a staff member approached her with a question about seating. Elaine answered calmly, the way she always did. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing. But someone else overheard. Mark's fiancée stepped in quickly, correcting the arrangement Elaine had mentioned. Her voice was polite but firm. Elaine nodded immediately and apologized, even though she hadn't meant to cause confusion. The moment should have ended there. But it didn't. Mark arrived seconds later, clearly already tense. He asked what was going on. Words overlapped. Explanations came too fast. Elaine opened her mouth to clarify, then closed it again. She didn't want to add to the noise. But Mark looked at her. His face was tight, embarrassed, defensive. Too many eyes were nearby. Too many expectations pressed down on him at once. He spoke sharply. He told Elaine she needed to stop interfering. He said today was not about her. His voice wasn't loud, but it was strong enough for people close by to hear. Conversations nearby slowed. A few heads turned. Elaine felt the heat rush to her face. She tried to respond gently. She said she was only answering a question. She said she didn't mean any harm. Mark cut her off. He said she was making things difficult. That she was stressing everyone out. That she should have known better. Silence spread in a small circle around them. People pretended not to listen, but they were listening. Elaine stood still. Her hands tightened around her purse strap. She searched Mark's face, hoping to find some sign of regret. She didn't see it. Then he said it. He told her to leave. The words didn't sound real at first. Elaine waited for him to soften them, to laugh, to realize what he was saying. But he didn't. He repeated himself, slower this time. Someone nearby shifted uncomfortably. Someone else looked away. Elaine felt something inside her go very quiet. She nodded once. Not because she agreed, but because she understood the situation clearly now. This wasn't about seating or stress. This was about control. About image. About embarrassment. She turned to walk away. Before she could take more than a few steps, 2 security staff members approached her. They spoke softly, respectfully. They said they were asked to escort her out. Elaine looked at them, then back at Mark. He didn't meet her eyes. No one stopped it. Not one person spoke up. Not one voice questioned what was happening. The music continued. Laughter rose from another part of the room, unaware or unwilling to notice. Elaine adjusted her purse on her shoulder. She thanked the staff quietly and followed them. Her steps were steady. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't look back. As she walked through the long hallway, her reflection passed by in tall mirrors. She saw herself clearly. An older woman, dressed simply, walking alone. She held her head high. Outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Quieter. The noise of the celebration faded behind closed doors. Elaine paused near the entrance. She took one deep breath. Then another. People passed her without recognition. To them, she was just another guest stepping out for fresh air. She walked to her car slowly. Each step felt heavy but controlled. She placed her purse on the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. For a moment, she simply sat there. The humiliation came in waves. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. She replayed the scene in her mind, every word, every glance. The absence of defense hurt more than the command to leave. Still, she did not cry. She straightened her shoulders, started the engine, and drove away. As the venue disappeared in the distance, Elaine told herself one thing, quietly but firmly. She had not lost her dignity. It had walked out with her. The celebration continued without her. The music played. The lights shone. And Elaine, alone on the road, carried the weight of silence once more, unaware that this moment, painful as it was, would soon change everything. The days after the wedding passed slowly, like time had decided to drag its feet. Elaine woke up the morning after with a heaviness she couldn't explain, even to herself. The house felt too quiet, but she didn't turn on the radio or the television. She let the silence stay. She expected a call. Not an apology, not explanations. Just a call. It didn't come. Elaine went through her routine as usual. She made her tea. She cleaned the kitchen. She watered the plants near the window. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside everything felt different. Something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Days turned into weeks. Mark didn't reach out. There were no messages, no short updates, No polite check-ins. Elaine didn't reach out either. Not because she was angry, but because she didn't know what to say anymore. Words felt fragile now. Once broken, they couldn't be trusted. She stayed home more than usual. When neighbors asked about the wedding, she said it was beautiful. When they asked how she was feeling, she said she was fine. The words came easily, even though they weren't fully true. At night, sleep came late. Elaine lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the house. She replayed the moment again and again. The look on Mark's face. The way no one stopped it. The quiet walk out. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she began organizing. It started with a drawer. Old papers she hadn't touched in years. Receipts. Statements. Letters. She told herself she was just cleaning. But as she read through the pages, something else began to happen. She found bank records showing transfers she had made months earlier. Large amounts. Dates carefully noted. She remembered each one clearly. The venue. The food. The decorations. She remembered how proud she had felt helping quietly. She placed the papers into neat stacks on the table. Then she found agreements. Not contracts. Not legal documents. Just written confirmations, emails, messages that mentioned payments, promises, shared responsibilities. Things she had never thought she would need again. Elaine read them slowly. For the first time, she didn't rush to justify her choices. She didn't tell herself she had done the right thing automatically. She simply looked at the facts. She realized how much she had given without question. How little she had asked in return. Not money. Not credit. Just respect. That thought stayed with her. During the day, Elaine kept herself busy. She cooked meals she barely touched. She folded laundry that was already clean. She organized photo albums but avoided looking too closely at the wedding pictures someone had shared online. She wasn't ready for that yet. There were moments when doubt crept in quietly. She wondered if her silence had protected Mark once, but hurt her now. She wondered if staying quiet had taught him that her feelings didn't matter. The question scared her. Elaine had always believed silence was strength. That patience solved more than confrontation ever could. That love meant endurance. Now, for the first time, she wasn't sure. She didn't feel anger. She felt clarity beginning to form, slowly, like light at the edge of a long tunnel. She began to understand that love didn't mean accepting everything. That kindness didn't mean disappearing. Still, she didn't reach out. She waited. Not for an apology, but for herself to understand what she needed next. One afternoon, Elaine sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread out before her. Sunlight fell across the pages. She ran her fingers over the edges, grounding herself in the moment. She thought about all the years she had stayed quiet. All the time she had stepped back so others could step forward. She had done it out of love. But love, she realized now, should not erase the person giving it. The house remained silent. The phone stayed still. And in that long silence, Elaine began to change. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But firmly. She folded the papers carefully and placed them into a folder. She didn't know yet what she would do with them. She only knew they mattered. That night, as she turned off the lights, Elaine felt something new settle in her chest. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Awareness. Silence had protected love once. But now, she saw clearly that it had also allowed disrespect to grow. And for the first time, Elaine understood that staying quiet was no longer the same as staying kind. Elaine waited several more days before doing anything. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted her thoughts to settle first. Acting too quickly had never been her way. She believed decisions made in calm lasted longer than ones made in pain. One morning, after another quiet night, she made a simple phone call. She didn't explain much. She only asked if she could speak with someone about a few financial questions. The voice on the other end was polite and professional. An appointment was scheduled. Elaine chose her clothes carefully that day, the same way she always did. Nothing bold. Nothing careless. She wanted to feel like herself. The office was small and orderly. Clean desks. Neutral colors. The kind of place that didn't invite emotion. Elaine appreciated that. It made it easier to focus. She explained her situation calmly. She spoke about the wedding, about the payments she had made, about how everything had been arranged. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't leave things out. She simply told the truth. The advisor listened closely, taking notes, occasionally asking questions. Elaine answered each one patiently. When the explanation ended, there was a brief pause. Then the advisor spoke. They explained that not all contributions were the same. Some payments, depending on how they were made and documented, were not considered simple gifts. Some carried obligations. Some created responsibility. Elaine listened without interruption. She learned that the money she had provided gave her more standing than she had ever imagined. That certain decisions should not have been made without her awareness. That silence did not erase involvement. The words landed slowly. Elaine felt no rush of victory, no sense of power. What she felt instead was surprise. Not at the system, but at herself. She realized how much control she had given away simply by assuming she didn't deserve any. The advisor asked what she wanted to do next. Elaine didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands resting neatly in her lap. Hands that had worked for years. Hands that had written checks without hesitation. Hands that had been steady even when her heart wasn't. She said she didn't want conflict. She didn't want to punish anyone. She only wanted to understand where she stood. The advisor nodded. They explained her options carefully, without pressure. Elaine listened, absorbing the information, storing it quietly. When the meeting ended, she thanked them and left. Outside, the day was calm. People passed by, living their lives, unaware that something important had shifted inside her. Elaine walked slowly, letting the information settle. She didn't feel angry at Mark. She didn't feel betrayed again. She felt aware. For the first time, she understood that kindness did not mean surrender. That generosity did not erase rights. She returned home and placed the new documents with the folder she had already prepared. Everything was neat now. Clear. Organized. Still, she said nothing. She didn't call Mark. She didn't send messages. She didn't hint at what she had learned. Silence, she realized, could also be intentional. This time, it wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about choosing the right moment. Elaine sat at her kitchen table that evening, the same place where she had once planned her contributions with hope. Now, she planned nothing aloud. She simply observed. She understood now that power didn't always look loud or demanding. Sometimes it looked like patience, backed by knowledge. And Elaine, quietly and deliberately, chose to wait. The first sign came quietly. Mark noticed a missed notice in his email late one evening. It was from the venue. Short. Professional. It mentioned an outstanding balance that needed immediate attention. He stared at the screen longer than expected, convinced it had to be a mistake. He forwarded the message to his partner, adding a quick note. They both believed everything had already been handled. Weren't the payments done? Hadn't all of that been covered? Another message arrived the next day. This one from a service provider involved with the reception. The tone was polite, but firm. They referenced invoices, dates, and agreements. Mark felt a tightness in his chest. He searched through his records, scrolling back through old messages, trying to piece things together. The more he looked, the less certain he felt. Some payments were clear. Others were not. There were gaps he couldn't explain. At first, he blamed confusion, stress, post-wedding exhaustion. But the calls kept coming. One afternoon, while sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, Mark finally said Elaine's name out loud. It felt strange, like speaking it after a long silence. He hesitated before reaching for his phone. When he called, Elaine answered calmly, as if no time had passed at all. Her voice was steady, familiar. Mark explained the situation quickly. He said there must be some mistake. He asked if she knew anything about the missing payments. Elaine listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him right away. When he finished, there was a pause. She told him she was aware of the situation. She said she had been meaning to talk to him, when the time was right. Mark asked what that meant. Elaine suggested they meet. They chose a quiet place. Neutral. Comfortable. Somewhere neither of them felt like a guest or an owner. Elaine arrived early and waited calmly, hands folded, eyes focused on nothing in particular. When Mark walked in, she stood and greeted him politely. No tension in her face. No coldness. Just calm. They sat. Mark spoke first. He admitted he was confused. He said he thought everything had been settled. He asked why these issues were coming up now. Elaine nodded slowly. She opened her folder. Inside were documents, statements, confirmations. Everything neatly organized. She placed them on the table one by one, explaining each piece without emotion. She showed what she had paid, what she had agreed to, what had never been finalized. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't remind him of the wedding day. She spoke only in facts. Mark leaned forward, scanning the papers. His confidence drained with each page. The realization came slowly, then all at once. Some payments he assumed were gifts had conditions. Some agreements required follow-ups that never happened. Some balances were never meant to be covered without discussion. Mark looked up at her. Elaine met his eyes calmly. She explained that she had always been willing to help, that she had done so out of love. But she had never agreed to disappear completely from decisions that carried responsibility. Mark didn't argue. The truth sat between them, heavy and undeniable. He apologized quietly. Not for everything. Not yet. But for misunderstanding. Elaine accepted the words without reacting. She didn't offer solutions immediately. She didn't demand repayment. She simply let the facts exist. Mark finally understood something he hadn't before. Silence had not meant approval. It had only meant trust. And that trust had been broken. As they stood to leave, Mark looked different. Less certain. More aware. Elaine gathered her papers calmly and placed them back into her folder. She wished him well and walked away, her steps steady. Behind her, Mark remained seated, staring at the table. Reality had arrived quietly, but it hit harder than anger ever could. Mark didn't sleep well after meeting Elaine. The papers she had shown him stayed in his mind, clear and unmovable. Facts were harder to argue with than feelings. He replayed the conversation again and again, wishing he had handled things differently, wishing he had listened sooner. At home, the mood felt different. The excitement that once filled the space after the wedding had faded, replaced by quiet tension. Small conversations turned sharp too quickly. Simple questions led to long pauses. When Mark brought up the unpaid balances and the meeting with his mother, the reaction was not what he expected. His wife was surprised. Then defensive. She said she thought everything had been taken care of. She reminded him of how stressful the planning had been, how many people were involved, how overwhelmed they both were. Mark listened, but something inside him had shifted. He began to realize how easily he had accepted a version of events that suited him. One where Elaine's role was small. One where her silence meant agreement. One where her presence was convenient until it wasn't. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he felt. He remembered the wedding day clearly now. The looks from nearby guests. The way his words had landed. The moment he told her to leave. At the time, he had justified it as stress, pressure, embarrassment. Now, it looked like cruelty. That realization didn't sit quietly. Conversations at home grew strained. His wife questioned why Elaine hadn't spoken up sooner. Why she had waited. Mark found himself defending his mother for the first time in years. He said she had always stayed quiet. That she had always given without asking. That maybe that was part of the problem. The words surprised him as he said them. Days passed. The distance between him and Elaine felt heavier now, not because of silence, but because of what he understood within it. Eventually, Mark reached out again. This time, he didn't ask about money. He didn't ask for help. He asked to talk. Elaine agreed. They met once more, in the same quiet place. Elaine arrived composed, her posture relaxed but firm. She didn't look tired. She didn't look defeated. She looked settled. Mark apologized. Not quickly. Not casually. He spoke about the wedding day. About how wrong it was. About how ashamed he felt now that he could see it clearly. He admitted he had acted out of entitlement, assuming her support would always be there, no matter how he treated her. Elaine listened. When he finished, she took a breath before speaking. She told him she accepted his apology, but acceptance did not mean things would return to how they were. For the first time, Elaine set boundaries aloud. She said respect was not optional. That acknowledgement mattered. That she would no longer stay silent to keep peace at her own expense. She explained that love did not require submission. That support did not mean erasing herself. That she was willing to forgive, but only within a relationship built on mutual respect. Mark listened without interruption. Elaine also made something else clear. Her independence mattered. Financially, emotionally, personally. She would choose when and how she helped going forward, without pressure or expectation. There was no anger in her voice. Just certainty. Mark nodded slowly. He understood that this was not punishment. This was the consequence. As they stood to leave, the air between them felt different than before. Not healed. Not broken. Honest. Forgiveness, Elaine knew, was possible. But submission was not. And for the first time in her life, she felt no need to stay quiet about the difference. Time moved forward, quietly but steadily. The days after Elaine and Mark's last meeting were not dramatic. There were no long messages, no emotional calls in the middle of the night. Instead, there was space. And for the first time, that space felt healthy. Elaine returned to her routines with a new sense of ease. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. She opened the windows in the mornings. She took longer walks. She allowed herself small comforts without guilt. Peace, she learned, did not need to be earned through sacrifice. Mark reached out occasionally. Sometimes just a short message. Sometimes a simple question. The tone was different now. Careful. Thoughtful. He no longer assumed her time or her support. He asked. Elaine noticed the change. They met again weeks later, this time without tension. The conversation was simple. Honest. Mark spoke less. He listened more. He acknowledged the harm he had caused, not as a single mistake, but as a pattern he was finally willing to see. Elaine spoke too. Not to reopen old wounds, but to close them properly. She told him how silence had once felt like love to her. How she believed enduring quietly made her strong. How she had confused patience with self-erasure. Mark listened, truly listened, in a way he hadn't before. Their relationship did not return to what it once was. It became something different. Healthier. Boundaries remained. Elaine kept them without apology. She offered support when it was asked for, and when it felt right. She said no when it didn't. And each time she did, the word felt less heavy. In another version of the ending, Elaine imagined what life would look like if reconciliation never fully came. She realized she would still be okay. Because she had already reclaimed what mattered most. Her voice. Her peace. Her self-worth. She no longer measured love by how much she could endure. She measured it by how safe she felt being honest. One afternoon, Elaine sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, sunlight warming the room. The same table where she had once stayed silent. The same place where she had learned to speak. She smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Silence had once protected her. But truth, spoken calmly and without fear, had changed everything. And this time, Elaine chose herself.